Bombay bench of the tribunal. First in Daga, and then thereafter a third member was there in DH Securities. There also they said that no, we will not accept this argument that just because it is stock in trade, the exempt income, there cannot be any expenditure related to that. According to me, it's not a correct decision. It's now pending in Bombay High Court. But after all these decisions, also there are Bombay Tribunal decisions which says that because you are doing stock in trade, because there is a taxable income, so we will only disallow to the extent of 20% of your interest portion or any such portion which you might have incurred for the business purposes. So right now at least some relief has been given to the SSE that they are not straight away applying the formula and disallowing as per the formula. They are restricting it to 20% of the second part of the formula, that is whatever that interest expenditure might have been incurred. But according to me, maybe High Court perhaps may come to the rescue because what you are offering is taxable income. Tax-free income is only a residual part which you are getting it, but that is not your intention at all. Your intention is only to earn taxable income. Now same thing I would rather say even this should apply to investment category also. Because let us say there are short-term gains and long-term gains both. So where there are short-term gains, it is a taxable gains. So if dividend is received on such type of shares which are offered for short-term gains, then again same theory should apply for that also because the expenditure is incurred for taxable income and not for tax-free income. So if that type of segregation one can make, then one can again rely upon this type of decision and say that at the most you may deserve 20%. Then exempt income versus Chapter 6A deduction. There are some peculiar cases also where the SSE is claiming Chapter 6A deduction and still disallowances are being made under 14A. Saying that because that income is not getting taxed, therefore analogy of 14A applies and therefore you have earned exempt income. The tribunals have said no, there is a distinction between exempt income and Chapter 6A deduction. Exempt income does not go into my computation of total income at all. Whereas Chapter 6A income goes in my computation and then a deduction is claimed. There is a distinction made by the tribunals and then they say that 14A provisions does not apply to Chapter 6A deductions. Then investment in subsidiaries in controlling interest. This also we see lots of time there are group companies. The partnership firms are there, group companies are there, and for controlling stake purposes, the directors and all those people have made investments, or even the one company has made holding company invest in lots of their subsidiary companies. The intention is not to earn any exempt income, and no dividend is also actually distributed or declared by such companies. It's only for the sake of controlling interest, and these arguments have hold good before the tribunals, and they have said that provisions of 14A will not apply if it is for controlling stake. Then investments generating exempt and taxable income. Now here we have cases where we see that, let us say, partnership firms. The partner brings in borrowed funds, invests it in partnership firm, gets remuneration, gets interest, but at the same time also gets profit from firm which are exempt from tax. If he is getting profits from firm, actually received profits which is exempt income, then disallowance would be made. Even though you can say that no, it was for remuneration or interest, but courts have said no, you have earned exempt income, so disallowance would be there. But if there is no profits, let us say there is no profit, then courts have also said that if there is no profit, then there is no exempt income earned, so no disallowance under 14A. So it will depend on facts of the case, but most of the time profits are always there and shared among the partners. So if expenses are claimed, then that could perhaps be disallowed. The netting of interest income against interest expenditure. Now here also there are many decisions, though I must have given only one or two, that if you can establish an excess, that interest borrowed funds, interest expenditure incurred, and those borrowed funds were utilized for again giving out for earning interest income. If those excess is established, then to the extent of interest income earned, you will get a set off of interest expenses incurred. And if your interest income is more than your interest expenditure, then no part of your interest expenditure will be disallowed under 14A. So if this nexus, but that onus of establishing nexus is on the assessee, not upon the department. Then we also have decisions where we are able to draw nexus that investments made in those investments were from my own funds, my own capital, and not out of my borrowed funds. So if that nexus can be drawn, or if these investments were quite old and now this nexus principle cannot be established, then also the courts have held that if you are having your own capital, that is other than your borrowed capitals, far more than your investment, then it will be presumed that your investment has come out from your own capital and therefore no disallowance will be made. Then again, interest in cases where disallowances exceeds your total expenses income. There are 2-3 cases. One is I think Delhi Tribunal also have given a Bombay Tribunal decision that expenses, let us say 100 rupees total expenses for my business, everything, and my exempt income is also there, dividend or whatever. Now as per rule 8D computation, the disallowance comes to 500 rupees. Though my actual expenses incurred and claimed in my profit and loss account is only 100 rupees. So can you make 500 rupees disallowance? The courts have, tribunals have said that no, you have to then restrict it only to the extent of expenditure claimed. But here also, according to me, these are also not correct decisions. Because if I am also doing my business or any other activity, then what about expenses towards those activities? You just can't simply say that because under rule 8D it was coming 500 rupees, so your entire 100 rupees will disallow. But then what about my other business? So for other business I have not incurred any expenditure. Without incurring any expenditure, I was just freely getting those other incomes. These things I don't know why the tribunals have not looked into. But according to me, this decision also needs verification, because some part of expenditure then also need to give against my other business incomes. And for rule 8D, while computing, see to it that the AO doesn't make a mistake or the assessee doesn't make a mistake, that entire investments are taken. Take only those investments which give you tax-free income. Because there are many investments which are taxable investments. Maybe FDs are there and so many other things are there which are taxable investments. So while computing those as per formula, don't take the entire investments, take only tax-free investments. And there also we have a decision which says that you don't need to take your entire investments. And coming to the third issue, this deemed dividend 222E only I have taken, because that is the only case which is commonly involved for all of us. Now just briefly, it is only applicable to closely held companies. It is applicable only if the nature of payment is advance or loan and not otherwise. And this also, advance or loan, this is again subject to exception that it was not in your ordinary course of business and the company's business was not a lending business. Then the persons covered are shareholders holding 10% or more, and the payments are made on behalf of such shareholders to any firm, partnership firms, AOP, HUFs, BOA, etc., where such shareholder or partner has substantial interest, that is more than 20%. Then your amount of deemed dividend will be the actual amount of loan or advance received during that particular year, neither opening balance, nothing, only during that year, and to the extent of your accumulated profits. Now, what is the purpose of this particular provision? The purpose, as stated by the courts and of course by the provision also, is that they don't want that the private companies give away funds to their shareholders or any other person in guise of dividend by way of loan or advance, because then that dividend tax is not been paid by the company and neither by the shareholders, and they get away from that. Actually, this dividend taxability itself should go away, because these are all out of the taxable incomes. Even the corporates, what they earn, they pay tax, and this is the lower part of it, from which they out of reserves and all those, they distribute dividend. In fact, dividend tax only should go away, but because it is generating good revenues for the government, they are not doing it. Then they say that provisions of 115(o) and 1034 should not be applicable. If that is applicable, then it will not fall under 222E. Then I have also given what is the definition of loan advance. Will not go into all these things. Just take the issues. Now, if it is a trade advance, if it is a business advance, then whether this provision can be hit or not. Now, of course, we have a lot of decisions which say that if it is an actual genuine trade advance, where let us say the shareholder is doing some business activity with the company, purchase and sale activity is going on regularly, then in those type of cases, if it is for trading purposes, then the amount given by the company cannot come under the purview of 222E. And there is an old Supreme Court decision also in Bombay Steam Navigation Company where they have said that every sale of goods on credit does not amount to a transaction of loan. A loan contracted no doubt creates a debt, but there may be a debt without contracting a loan. So they have distinguished between a loan and a debt. But if it is a trading goods, sales is made and a debtor is created, doesn't mean that because it is outstanding then it is a loan. Of course, courts have also seen that if it is only a debit balance, without any only transaction of sale is shown and a debit balance is going on, then they say that then we will consider this as your deemed dividend because then the genuineness of transaction itself is in doubt. But if it is a proper genuine transaction, then this provision will not be here. Then intercorporate deposits, they are outside this purview of 222E for the reason that they are deposits and neither loan or advance. This is the argument. Then provision of interest. Suppose transaction of loan is already been done and interest provision is also made. Then interest provision is not a loan. That is what the Bombay High Court has said. This is only the actual amount of loan that will be treated as your deemed dividend, but provision of interest will not be treated as your deemed dividend. And in that decision itself, Bombay High Court has also held that opening balance cannot be taxed in this year. What can be taxed in this year is only the amount given in this year and not of prior years. Then if some advance or loan is given in lieu of some obligation, that is, it is not a gratuitous loan, in the sense that suppose the company wants this premises and this premises is in the name of the director or the shareholder, and suppose the shareholder gives this premises to the company and takes advance or whatever towards rental income or even towards the security deposit as an advance for giving this property on lease, those amounts will not come under the purview of 222E because there is no obligation. It's not a gratuitous amount given. There is an obligation from the shareholder to the company. Similarly, if some guarantees are given by the director, and in lieu of that guarantee, if some security is given or something is given, then also it will not come under this purview of 222B. Then repayments of loan. Suppose you have taken 100 rupees today from the company, and on the very next day, suppose you repay this 100 rupees. Still, this 100 rupees received will be treated as your deemed dividend, even though you might have repaid that entire 100 rupees very next day. So repayment of loan is nothing to do with this provision of deemed dividend, and there is Supreme Court decision, an old Supreme Court decision in this behalf. Then with respect to a registered and a beneficial shareholders, now we have a lot of decisions, including Bombay High Court decision, which says that the taxability will be only in the hands who is an actual shareholder of the company. Assuming that A company and B company, and the director is a shareholder of A company, the loan is given by A to B. Now B is not a shareholder of A. So at the most you could have taxed it in the hands of the shareholder, this deemed dividend, but you could not tax it in the hands of B company. So if the assessing officer taxed this as loan taken by B company from A company and the shareholder is a common having substantial interest, the taxability can go in the hands of shareholder but not in the hands of B company. So this decisions also we have now. Now coming to accumulated profits. Accumulated profits.
Sir, here what happens in the case of the partnership?
In which case?
Where the company has given loan to a partnership firm has shares in the private company. Now shares normally are held in the name of individual partners, not in the name of partnership. So then it becomes a triangle. The
Then-
firm is a shareholder by giving money, by buying shares of a company. Company gives loan to the firm, partnership firm. But the shareholder will be only the partner.
So registered holder is the partner.
So the transaction between the firm and the company then will not get attracted
It will be only attracted to the partner.
to the partner. The
Because
fund-
partner is the registered shareholder.
But the funds are given in the balance sheet of the firm. They have invested.
Maybe, because ultimately what is partnership firm? It is creation of partners, individuals. So it will go in the hands of the partner, not the firm.
There is a judgment of Delhi High Court in the case of National Travel Service, which has exploded this thing, that in that event, the firm will never be liable to 222. They say in that.
But then they can always tax to in the hands of partners. They can always tax to the partner. Because otherwise all these decisions, everywhere the same thing is happening. Because even, let us say the funds have flowed from the company only to another company. Shareholders doesn't give any fund or none, and not come to the shareholder at all. But still deemed dividend will be attracted to in the hands of shareholder, not to the company. So in that, all those cases also companies will never be attracted for 223. That is why they say that it will be only the registered shareholders. They don't want beneficial shareholding. They want registered shareholding. So this dispute was going on since long. And now, after Bombay High Court has upheld that interpretation that it will be only the registered shareholder who should be taxed and not any other person.
So what happens if the SSC with his minor child hits this limit of 10%?
If it is a minor child, then it will be governed by the guardian.
Means without the minor child, the shareholding in partnership holding is less than 10%. But if the minor child's share is also considered, then it is above.
That's what I'm saying. It will be considered because it is the guardian who is looking after for the minor. Minor is not a taxable entity. It's only the guardian. With the clubbing provision also, the guardian is only taxed. So by virtue of clubbing provision, they will say that he is only holding 20% or 10%. Better to avoid all those situations because these are all then it will go into litigation. Because the assessing officer will immediately say these are all clubbing provisions applicable. So I'll club all the, because minor interest is ultimately guardian's interest. Because who is then conducting the business affairs? It's only the guardian who is conducting. Minor is only for the sake of safety purposes.
Sir, in case of a director, he is having a residential flat and he has taken a housing loan on that residential flat. He is having a private company. That loan is taken over by the private company, converting into LAP.
Converting into
LAP, loan against property, and that loan, housing loan is converted into LAP to the company. So that housing loan is repaid by company, and that amount is fully credited to this director. Whether it is treated as a deemed dividend income,
it should be treated. What is the benefit for the company?
the company
It's the loan is for the director.
residential, yeah.
It's for his residential purposes. So the obligation to make payment or whatever the expenses towards this loan is of the director. If the company is making any such payments on behalf of director, forget the loan or interest part, even any other expenses, individual's personal credit card expenses or any such expense if the company is bearing, then that also attracts 222E.
Loan is converted because the company needs fund, and company has got additional fund also because of that.
If you can prove that it was for the purpose of company's requirement,
Yeah.
that I have given my residence as a collateral security or any such thing, then it will not be attracted. But you have to prove that fact. Now coming to accumulated profits, as I said, accumulated profits as on the date the loan is given. Only to that extent it would be, and it is only commercial profits and not assessed income. So whatever assessed income assessing officer may have made, but in the books what commercial profits are, then only to that extent it will be taken. Then as I mentioned, payments for and behalf of director, shareholder for personal expenses, etc. Those will be also treated as deemed dividend as advance given. Then quantum of deemed dividend. Whether this should be restricted only to the extent of shareholding in the company. Let us say the director is having shareholding only up to 10% or let us say 20-30%. Now, whether accumulated profit should also be restricted to 30%. The court have said no. Whatever is the actual amount, up to accumulated profits, entire amount will be taxed in his hands, whether his shareholding in the company is 10%, 20%, 30%. Then TDS. TDS and reporting by auditor. These two things are very important. Because in many cases we see that these things are never there at all. Because if you are auditing a company and if you come across that they have given loan to the director, then first TDS should have been deducted under 194, which is not done by the company. Of course, it's a different thing that you cook up some story, some explanation, but if there is nothing of such type and it's a clear case of deemed dividend, then 194 should have been there. If it is not done by the company, see to it that you report in your Form 3CD, Chapter 17B, whether tax was deducted or not. Because otherwise, there may be a case against you also. Then next is cessation of liabilities. I'll just now rush up fast because I think the time is. Now, cessation of liabilities is a recently we have come across very contradictory decisions. Earlier, this 3 years time limit, everybody was saying that 3 years time limit, okay, it's become time barred, so it has to be ceased to exist and all those things. But that is not the law. This time barring of 3 years is only for Limitation Act. That is, that he cannot then enforce particular suit in court of law or something. But that doesn't mean that he cannot recover from you. Recovery from you is different and Limitation Act provisions are different. So 3 years period ended doesn't mean that it has ceased to exist. Now what was happening in many cases, which even one or two cases even I may have dealt with, that the outstanding liabilities are as far as 15 years down the line, 16 years down the line. The balances are just keep on opening, closing without any transaction. Parties not available, who the parties is nobody knows. Addresses are not available, nothing is available. And still the argument was made that 41(1) cannot be triggered because I have not written off this liability in my books of accounts, in my profit and loss. Therefore, it has to be a bilateral act. That is, you also need to know whether the creditor has given up this amount from me and whether he has also, in his books of accounts, he has written off this liability. Now, these arguments were raised and by and large they were accepted also by tribunal and the courts also. But just because the creditor is not available, you cannot say that this liability ceased to exist until and unless the party writes it off in his books of accounts. We have Supreme Court decision also to this effect in Shogawli Sugar Works. But even as on date now, contrary decisions are there. There are Delhi High Court, Gujarat High Court, a recent Gujarat High Court also as far as February 2014. After referring to the Supreme Court decision, they have interpreted that yes, you cannot make this addition under 41(1) until and unless there is a bilateral act or the assessee himself has written it off as no more payable. Because till that stage comes, you cannot yourself seize this liability that it does not exist anymore and 41(1) to be applied. But there are decisions which are against the assessee also. There is a Delhi High Court decision and following Delhi High Court decision, there are two Bombay Tribunal judgments which I have given in my note. In these decisions, what they have held is that forget bilateral acts. Where is the intention to pay? 10 years, 15 years down the line, even when the hearing is taken place, till that date of hearing, you are not making any payment. Not a single rupee is paid. It's just a balance being shown as outstanding from year after year. So where is the liability existing? Where is the intention to pay? The creditors are no more existing. Summons have come back. Addresses are not there. Persons are not traceable. You yourself doesn't know who the person is now. So where is the question of saying that your liabilities still exist in your books of accounts? So tribunal has now recently come down very heavily. One is of May 2014 judgment and said that we will not treat this as your existing liability. This is a liability which has now ceased to exist. Applying 41(1), they will confirm that order of the AO. So contrary judgments have raised, but my personal feeling is that tribunal is in a way right. If you are not able to establish your liability for last 15 years, that creditor is existing, or he may come down one fine day and ask for his payment, from where, how can you still say that it has not ceased to exist? Just because you show in your balance sheet that the liability is existing year after year, doesn't mean that it is actually existing. And here also we have a reporting in audit, tax audit form.
Liability has been created about 15, 20 years back. Then can the department go beyond that 8 years limitations?
They are not disallowing you for that year. They are making addition under 41(1). See, 41(1) provisions they will have to abide. That onus is on the department to prove that yes, these amounts were actually debited by you, claimed as expenses by you, and now it is a liability outstanding in your books which you are not paid 10 years, 15 years down the line. Since now you have not paid these liabilities and you had claimed expenses in your return in those years, so now we are adding it under 41(1) as no more payable. And therefore 41(1) can be attracted even after 10-15 years. Here also reporting is required under 41(1) in tax audit forms. But I think the reporting is only if you are writing it off, writing it back in your accounts, otherwise it is not required. But see to it that in any of your cases, if it is liabilities are since last 15-20 years going on, better to now offer yourself. Now because contrary decisions have been coming, so better to offer it ourselves. Then search assessment 153, I will not take the entire proceedings because search itself is a seminar in itself. But here only one or two issues. What is abatement and what is pending? As on the date of search, if any assessment is going on, then that will abate. And the only assessment that will be made is of 153A, that is search assessment. But if your assessment is already completed as on the date of search, then that assessment is not abated, that is attained finality, unless and until something extra is found or unearthed in the course of search action. So for those years, assessing officer should not make, I would say should not make. They do make additions and disallowances, that's a different thing, but they should not make any other additions or disallowances because that is attained finality. So once again, they cannot keep on reviewing their own orders. But this is happening, and this is happening more so in such type of cases where it has already attained finality at tribunal stage. The issue was raised in original proceedings, AO disallowed, went to CIT appeals, either CIT appeal confirmed or allowed the deduction, went up to tribunal, tribunal has allowed the claim to the assessee, maybe department is in further high court, and thereafter a search takes place. The assessing officer once again makes the same disallowance or doesn't allow you the same deduction because he had disallowed in the earlier proceedings. Now whether that can be done, in my view it cannot be done because you cannot review your own orders until and unless some further evidence is found either in the course of search action or because of this Bombay High Court decision of Murli Agro Products, which people feel that it is in their favor, but according to me it's not in their favor, because Murli Agro says that either evidence is gathered in search action or during the search assessment, then the AO can very well make the same disallowance once again, but not otherwise. So Murli Agro, many people feel that it is in favor of the assessee, though decision is finally in favor of the assessee, but these observations are not correct according to me. Because evidences should be restricted to search proceedings, not assessment of search proceedings. So they have said that even if the evidences are found in search assessment proceedings, even then the disallowance can be made. In that case, it was an issue of 80HHC. It was originally allowed to the assessee, and thereafter search took place. The AO once again made the disallowance of 80HHC. The tribunal said, how can you once again make the disallowance? They went to Bombay High Court. Bombay High Court, though confirmed order, But they have made this observation that no evidences was also found in search assessment proceedings. Meaning thereby that if in search assessment proceedings something is found,